Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the Getting Stuck webinar, Deconditioning the Burnout Mindset. I'm Dr. Maisha, the Stress-Free Mom MD. And before we get started, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I am a family physician by training, and I have been practicing integrative medicine for the past 10 years in private practice. I am certified in a number of various disciplines, but what I want you to know is I have been a coach for the last 9 years, mostly coaching my patients up until about 2 years ago, where I began to turn my attention to healthcare providers, and most recently in the last year, specifically physicians. And one of the reasons that I have taken on the coaching of and empowering of physicians is because what I see is that we as a community are one of the only professions that do not have advocacy. We pour ourselves into other people on a day-to-day basis. We give of ourselves to our patients. We give of ourselves to our spouses. We give of ourselves to our families, our children, and we are a profession that doesn't really have anybody to be there for us. As well, our industry is such that it doesn't really pull for the safety of for us to be vulnerable. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. There's a specific conditioning of the physician that has us be a particular way about reaching out for help and for support. And this conditioning mindset is what has us be at such high risk for burnout and experience this stuckness that I'm going to be talking about. So when I speak about in this webinar, I'm going to be speaking about the pathway from going from burnout to balance, and this is through deconstructing and deconditioning that burnout mindset. The other thing I want you to know about me is that I have experienced burnout twice in my career. So when I speak about burnout, I don't speak about it from an academic standpoint. While I have read many studies and seen a lot of statistics and research on burnout, I don't speak of burnout from an academic standpoint. I speak of it from an experiential standpoint. And so all of the things that I talk about are things that I have learned personally, experienced in some way, and have used. These are tools that I have used to recover from my own burnout. So I want you to know that as well. And even for those people who listen to this this webinar, who have been close to suicide, who have lost other friends from suicide, I have been down that dark path as well and have recovered. So I want to say that there is hope, and all there needs to do is to be a willingness to reach out, and for those who are concerned about someone, to share this with someone else. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell, and let's get started. So when you look at this word cloud, do you see anything in this that's familiar for yourself? A lot of times, we walk around with a mask smiling, but underneath that, behind that mask, underneath the surface, we are feeling a multitude of things. And so I can't talk about getting unstuck without talking about one of the major things that actually contributes to and causes stuckness, which is burnout. And here I want to kind of distinguish between stress and burnout, and then we'll talk a little bit about the key symptoms. But the difference between stress and burnout is that with burnout, it's really kind of insidious. It's this like continuous spiral downward, whereas with stress, it can go up and down. It's kind of like a sine wave. You can be more stressed or less stressed, more stress or less stress. But when you get to the point of burnout, there's no recovery there. You're just spiraling downward, kind of like, if you can imagine a tornado spiral downward. Many people know that they're stressed, but a lot of people don't know when they're burned out. So the first key symptoms of burnout is emotional exhaustion. This is the inability to recover with time off. So have you ever been on a vacation, a 7 day or sometimes even longer vacation, and on that seventh day or on that last day, you are dreading coming back, dreading the anticipation of it. And when you get back, that day before you have to go back to work, so you feel like you hadn't even stepped off your door step in the first place. This is that emotional exhaustion, that inability to recover, even with time off. Some people even take sabbaticals for months at a time, but when they come back and get ready to go back to work, they're automatically drained and feel like that that they never had that time off in the first place. The second is depersonalization. Now, a key point with depersonalization is cynicism and sarcasm. Cynicism is it is a characteristic of our industry anyway, but when you find yourself um, being sarcastic, negative, um, killing possibility is what I like to call it. When someone comes with a solution or comes with something positive, you automatically shoot it down. That would be cynicism. Sarcasm, the Greek translation for sarcasm is tearing of the flesh. So if you find yourself in a sarcastic mood when it comes to patients, particularly, or having an uncaring attitude, then you're displaying the symptoms of depersonalization. It's almost like you are removing yourself from the closeness of whatever that is that's causing you to suffer. It's commonly referred to as compassion fatigue. And when we experience that compassion fatigue, we want to disconnect ourselves from the pain, from the vulnerability, from the emotionality of what we're dealing with. And let's face it, medicine is a very emotional industry to be in. We deal with sick patients, we deal with chronic illness, we lose patients, we deal with, sick children. It's a roller coaster. We bring life into the world and we see life leave this world. And so it's a very, very emotional industry to be in. And when you are dealing with that kind of high emotional state ongoingly, then you really can have that compassion fatigue. And a lot of us go into medicine because we have big hearts, because we care. But there's only so much that we can give of ourselves if we are not taking the time to take care of ourselves. So that's where the depersonalization comes from. It's really a coping mechanism to disconnect ourselves from the emotionality of the constant emotional roller coaster, the constant emotional drain that is the result of that it comes with our industry. And the third is reduced accomplishment. You ever gotten to a point where it feels like no matter what you're doing, you're not making a difference? No matter what you say to patients, they're not going to do it anyway. No matter what you do inside of medicine, it's not going to change anything. Whatever you do, suggestions you make inside your organization, nobody's going to listen. It doesn't make a difference. So that's the reduced sense of accomplishment. Nothing that you're doing feels like it's making a difference anymore. And it's characterized by sort of a hopelessness and even a resignation. You're going to hear me talk a little bit about resignation and cynicism because it is a key characteristic of our industry and it's a key indicator of burnout. So take a moment and rate yourself on the pain scale. You can look by specialty, and then there's another way to look at it here. You can look by where you are in practice. So just take a moment to rate yourself and just notice whether you are rating yourself honestly or whether you are um, fudging up a little bit, whether you're downplaying your suffering, because that is a characteristic as well, which you'll hear me talk about in a moment. If you are not honest about where you are, then there's nowhere to go. And if you are honest, then we identify the problem and then we can actually do something about it. So there are uh, signs, physical, emotional, and behavioral signs of provider burnout. And you can see any of these. You might see yourself in any of these symptoms that are, the physical fatigue, tired all the time. Of course, working 60, sometimes 80 hours a week, you're going to be physically tired, maybe not able to sleep, maybe having anxiety or depressed or feeling helpless or trapped. Maybe on the extreme side, you're actually starting to take longer to get things done, i.e. charting, procrastination, taking your frustrations out on others. Maybe your family is telling you, please get some help, So these are some of the signs and symptoms, physical, emotional, and behavioral, of burnout. These are some of the warning signs that we might be headed towards burnout. If you ever hear or say, these are the justifications that we make, and these justifications that we make are warning signs. So we really need to listen to our language. Our own, we don't often listen to the words that are coming out of our mouth. We just walk around kind of in a daze and asleep saying these things, not realizing that these could be key indicators that we're heading down that spiral of burnout. So you want to look at these and say, are any of these familiar to you, that you catch yourself saying any of these things? Not only that, there may be some things on here, there may be some things that you say that are not on here. The point is really listening to your language. And the reality is, burnout is not something that just affects you. It affects your staff, their performance, morale, communication, their retention. It affects your patients. It affects your family and friends, and especially spouse. I mean, it can really go deep into the relationship, because of course, at the end of the day, when you take off that white coat and get ready to go home, your burnout doesn't stay at the office. So as we talk about stuckness, which we think about burnout, these are some of the key underlying causes leading to feeling burned out, or feeling stuck. Now, when I refer to stuckness, stuck could be a precursor to burnout. And as a family physician, I value prevention, which is why I do these webinars, which is why I have chosen to be a coach of physicians, is because I value prevention. So when I speak about stuckness, speaking of it in a preventative sense, the steps before you actually find yourself in the spiral of burnout. So one of the first external triggers is values misalignments. And you'll see here, we'll go through all of these, most of these triggers, but values misalignment, that's if your values are not aligned with the job that you're in, with maybe the job is fine, but the organization as a whole doesn't share the values that you have. Maybe it's an individual, your boss or your team, you have misalignment of values, and then, or maybe it's your career in general. Maybe there's something about the career path that doesn't align with your core deep values. And then it can also be in your personal life. So when you think about being stuck, values misalignment is one of the deepest core things that can lead to feeling stuck. And how you know that is, you may not be able to put your finger on it, but there's something deep inside that feels off to you about any of these things, about the job, about the organization. And when your values are misaligned in your job and your organization and with your team or boss, you'll find that you don't get along as well with the people on the team. And this is where people can be labeled disruptive, because there's something about the job of the organization or the boss or team that doesn't sit right with you, and you're in that situation, that circumstance, and things are just not fitting, gelling. In the career, it's the same thing. You went into this career because you wanted to help people, you wanted to make a difference, and perhaps there's something about the career, or something about the career path that you chose, a particular path that you chose, that doesn't sit right with you. I can tell you specifically a story for myself. when I was in, I chose family medicine because of the variety, because of the continuous challenge of being a family physician, and of having to diagnose from the womb to the tomb, and be able to manage these people. And I really actually am grateful that I chose this path. However, being inside of residency, and even coming out of residency, I realized that, I'd gone into family medicine. I enjoyed the practice of medicine, but all of the bureaucracy and the inability to spend time with patients, get to know my patients, because I was having to see them within 15 minutes to 20 minutes, was something that just didn't feel right for me. And so, while I was in residency, particularly in my second year, I began to feel very disconnected, loss of motivation, depressed, and I really got to a point where I felt like I couldn't go on anymore. I felt like, I spent all this money going into this career that I thought I would love, and I wasn't loving it. I wasn't loving it, and I felt like I was trapped. I felt like I was trapped, and what could I do? And at the time, I didn't have the tools to know that this was a values misalignment. I just knew something was off. Um, and I ended up talking to people and getting some help. But what I what I discovered is that I couldn't practice medicine the way they were training me to practice medicine. I just knew that was out of alignment with what I wanted to do, what my calling was. Similarly, once I came out of residency, I actually began to do locums tenens, and I did locums for six years, actually 8 years, for 8 years after I came out of residency, and in fact, part of that time was crossover for when I started my practice, because I did start my practice in 2007, but I continued to do locums tenens. And I started to realize, and this is around the time also that I trained in coaching and I started to learn about values misalignment, that I would notice that certain practices that I would go into, that things were off, it was a values issue. I worked in a pain clinic for a very short period of time, and the entire time I was miserable. It was because I trained as an integrative medicine physician, um, was totally out of alignment with the fact that I was prescribing Percocet and you know MS Contin and all these types of things every day. It was totally out of alignment, but I had chased the money, and that was the consequence of that. So this is what I mean by values misalignment. Now, the other thing that can lead to stuckness is personal life stressors. We are human. We are people. I think the general community doesn't realize that we experience personal life stressors like anyone else. We have our own sicknesses. We have trouble with our finances sometimes. We have children. We have families that we have to deal with. And sometimes we have special needs children. Sometimes we have problem children, children who are addicted, parents who are addicted, spouses who are addicted. We have relationship problems. We have aging parents. We have all of these various things that we see our patients go through. And the thing is that we are giving, and those people whom we are giving to don't realize that we have our own issues, and we are conditioned to leave it at the door. So if you can imagine, if you're having all of these personal life stressors, and you're conditioned to leave it at the door and go in and be everything for your patients, eventually stuffing that down is going to be like stuffing too much trash in a trash can, and that's going to cause a clogging. It's going to overflow. Emotions are going to overflow, and that leads to burnout. So this is another external trigger that leads to that stuckness. And again, we're going to talk about getting unstuck, but I want to make sure that I get to all the triggers here. The practice environment. Our industry is very demanding, and it is, we have these long work hours, these demanding schedules that require this personal sacrifice. these days you're overloaded with patients. We can have these difficult colleagues and staff. There's all of this paperwork, there's all this bureaucracy, and then we add in the workplace bullying. If you're And of course, I know I'm talking to mostly women in medicine. um, there's a lot of gender bias, and there is racial and cultural bias as well, not only from patients but from our colleagues. And that's a thing that's not talked about in our community. It's hush hush, but we experience just as much gender and racial bias within our community as physicians, from physicians, than we as we do from patients. And it's a sad thing, because we as a community could be taking care of ourselves, when instead we are viewing each other as the enemy, as competition. And I see that between genders, between races, and I also see it amongst gender and amongst races. So I'm not singling out one against the other. It's all over the place: the bullying, the gender, and the racial bias. So with all of these, all of this type of demand on the practice environment, of course, if we're not taking care of ourselves, this will lead to burnout. This will lead to stuckness. And then there's the culture of medicine. And I alluded to this before, which is we are depicted as being these strong, silent, self contained heroes who never show a hint of emotion. And our conditioning is to leave the feelings at the door and never show weakness. And you could probably think of some times in your training and even in your practice where you felt a certain way, and maybe something happened with a patient that really upset you, and you felt like you had to go to a bathroom stall and cry, or you had to go out to your car and cry, or you had to suck it up and put that mask on, and not show the weakness, or you know, leave those feelings somewhere else. And even sometimes our families don't get it. We come home, we've had a hard day, something that is very disappointing or hurtful to the heart, and we feel like we can't share that, because our family may not understand that these things hurt. They feel like, "Your doctor, suck it up, you see this stuff all the time, you should be used to it." So these are some external there's the culture, and the conditioning of our of medicine is what leads to stuckness. And then there's the personality. I call it the avatar. And I stole that from my colleague who's a psychiatrist, but I call it the avatar. There's the typical avatar who goes into medicine: the independent, the lone ranger, the self-sacrificing, the strong-willed, and yes, the know-it-all. Because let's face it, we think we know everything, and these types of personality traits lead us to want to do everything on ourselves, to take on too much, to never ask for help, and allow our pride and our ego to get in the way, which, when that happens, again, leads to the spiral. So this is why we stay. So that's how we get stuck. This is why we stay stuck. We talked about this earlier: cynical and resign. Now, resignation sounds like, oh, oh well, I just, I'll just give up. I just won't try anyway. Why bother? That's what resignation sounds like. Cynicism sounds like shooting down any possibility that comes. It sounds like, yeah, but, or I doubt it, or I don't believe that, or any rebuttal. That's cynicism. And I'll tell you, resignation and cynicism are possibility killers. And let me tell you, we as physicians, we have been killing possibility for decades. This is part of our conditioning. If you can think of a time, and you probably have even experienced possibility being murdered in your organization. If you just think of a time when you had a really great idea. Maybe it was an idea for a pilot project. Maybe you had an idea for a research project or a study. Maybe you had an idea for even some type of new invention for tech or med, and then you shared it with another physician. And that physician said, well, yeah, but it'll never work. Or um, that physician found all the holes, all the holes in your possibility. And then what did you feel in that moment? You've had this sinking feeling in your heart, this sinking feeling in your gut, like, wow, you were so excited about this thing and you got shot down. So just if you think about that, this is something that you might have seen over and over again. This is something that when I talk to my clients, my physician clients, I hear over and over again. They have these ideas to make the workplace a better place, or to improve patient flow, or to improve EMR charting. And when they share it with their physician leaders, it gets shot down or it gets ignored. That's another possibility killer. It gets ignored or placated. So because we are so cynical, so I'm saying this is possible that it's been done to you, but you want to look for yourself and be really honest. Where are you cynical? Where are you resigned? And where are you a possibility killer? All right? So get real honest. Where have you killed a possibility before? And because where you kill possibility, that's where you stay stuck. Okay, so the other thing is we have somewhat of a scarcity mindset as an industry. I remember I talked a little bit earlier about the fact that we can't talk to each other because number one, we kill possibility, but number two, we often are competing with each other where there's really nothing to be gained, right? And so here's the thing about that, and it's not competition for more patients necessarily. It's not competition for more money necessarily, but what it's a competition is who can look the smartest, who can appear to be the strongest, who can who can be the most what's the word I want to use? Who can be the most revered, accomplished? Can have the most awards. There's this background competition. Who can have the most power? There's this background competition in our community that keeps us in this sort of scarcity mindset. Implicit in this type of competition is that there's not enough to go around. And so, take a look, and I know that might sound new, but if you just allow your mind to take a look, that any time that we are competing with each other in any way, it is implicit that there is not enough to go around, not enough accolades, not enough power, kill or be killed, eat or be eaten, that there's not enough. So when we operate as a community in this scarcity mindset, then we stay stuck as a community. When you operate in a scarcity mindset, and that's scarcity from a financial standpoint, that's scarcity from an accolades or power standpoint, emotional standpoint. It's any time that you operate with there's not enough, then we stay stuck. The other thing about staying stuck, is that we as physicians are exclusive. We exist in these cliques, in these groups, and these tribes, and that sends the message to people that are with different mindsets that are not in our cliques or particular cliques and tribes, that they are less than, which also implies scarcity. Now, I know that you're probably thinking at this point, well, damn, she's telling us all of the ways that we're doing stuff wrong. And you could view it that way if you'd like. But what I encourage you and empower you to do is look at this as an opportunity to see where we can make a difference with each other. Because as I talk about the stuckness of the individual, I also am talking about the stuckness of our industry. And these cliques and groups and tribes and the scarcity mindset that we walk around with is a part of why we as a community of physicians stay stuck, but it trickles down to the individual. So you may be experiencing being extricated from a clique or a group or a tribe, and or you may be a part of one. And I'll give you a great example. 10 years ago, when I went into integrative medicine, or 12 years, 13 years actually, because I've been practicing for 13 years. When I decided to go into integrative medicine, it wasn't very popular back then. It wasn't as mainstream. It wasn't an American board specialty. It was something that was fairly new to traditional doctors. It wasn't new in the sense of being practiced. It was just beginning to be known by the Western community. So when I would talk about being an integrative physician to Western doctors, I was automatically ostracized because I was doing something that was different. I had a different mindset than my colleagues. So having experienced that exclusiveness, um, I can definitely say that it is a thing that exists, and it can contribute to our stuckness, and um, individually and as a group. Now let me bring it back home individually though. When you are exclusive, that means your mind is not open. Okay, so exclusivity implies not only scarcity but implies a closed mind. And when you have a closed mind or a narrow view, and if you can think about, if you think about your peripheral vision, and your peripheral vision goes as far as it can go, maybe 180 degrees, excuse me. And so if you think about the narrow view, like say if you suddenly had tunnel vision, then you can't see all of the various possibilities around you. So when we are exclusive, when we have an exclusive mindset, we have a closed mindset or a tunnel vision mindset. And that in turn will keep us stuck because we cannot see all of the various possibilities that would get us unstuck. When you have an abundant mindset and differences are embraced and celebrated rather than shunned or ignored, then you can actually see all, excuse me, not only see all the possibilities, but have a community that can actually pull you up and help to get you unstuck as well. Now, of course, this is something that I'm sure you know. We are self-sacrificing. This is the basic psychographic profile of probably just about every physician's. Now, if you take self-sacrifice, if you take self-sacrificing and you have the basic profile of the physicians plus our training, then you get this sort of unconscious martyrdom. It's like we throw ourselves on the fire unnecessarily. And this is part of the I can do it all by myself. I'm going to take on everything. I'm going to work myself to the bone. I don't need sleep. I don't need self-time. I don't need downtime. And I feel guilty if I take it anyway. This is the unconscious martyrdom. And notice I say unconscious because we don't do it consciously. It's part of our unconscious conditioning. And some of it's the conditioning from our training, but some of it is the conditioning because it's the basic personality trait that goes into medicine. So when we start to look at how we're self-sacrificing and how that's very unresourceful for our health and our well-being, this is another reason that we stay stuck. And then related to that is we downplay our suffering. Now we see people who are worse off than us all of the time. So this leads us to the syndrome of, oh, there's so many people worse off from me, so why am I complaining syndrome? But yet doctors are killing themselves almost daily. I can't tell you how many articles I've read in the last month of physicians committing suicide, and it breaks my heart. Every time I hear about another doctor taking their life, I get a lump in my throat. My heart feels like it tightens a little bit. Tears come to my eyes, and I'll tell you why. It's because I know what it feels like to be in that dark space right before you take your life. I know the pain of that. I know the pain of that. So, downplaying our suffering does not serve us. That's why earlier when I had you rate yourself from 1 to 10, I said, notice whether you're downplaying your suffering. Sure, there may be people who financially are worse off, who physically are worse off, who even have been victimized and are emotionally worse off. But that doesn't give you um, justification to downplay where your pain is. Because the more we downplay and we swallow our own pain, the more we're hurting ourselves. So it's time to be honest about where you are, honest about that. And when you can be honest about it, then you have a place to stand from which to recover. And so here's the other piece, and this is part of our conditioning too. We know all the answers. Now, yeah, this is something, I'm a physician, I can say this. We are know-it-alls of the largest kind. We were trained, it's not totally our fault, right? We were trained that not knowing all the answers could kill someone. So therefore, we were trained that we had to know all the answers all the time. And if you think about your residency, what would happen when you were on rounds and your attending or your senior resident asked you a question that you didn't know? You got ostracized. You might have got ridiculed. You may have gotten punished in some way, So, we called it pimping back in the day. So, we were trained that not knowing the answers have consequences and could kill someone. So, of course, we have not learned to sublimate that behavior or balance that behavior, and we feel we know all the answers, and we feel that if we don't know all the answers, we should know all the answers. So then there's like guilt associated with being burnout or being stuck and feeling like we should know how to fix it. For God's sake, we're doctors. We heal people. We save lives. How come we can't fix ourselves? Because we don't know all the answers. And similar to we know all the answers, we have to do it ourselves. I don't need anyone's help. This is part of the never show weakness indoctrination. So if you imagine when you were in residency, maybe you were on call in the ER, slammed as an intern, and there was the decision to call the senior resident or power through it. And most of the time, what did we do? Most of the time, we're going to power through it. And then the final thing is our own lack of emotional intelligence. Our training does not empower emotional intelligence. Our training is traumatic. And this whole never show weakness, it doesn't empower us to really communicate what we feel or sometimes even know what we feel. That is why we end up expressing our emotions in sometimes some unresourceful manner. That's why some physicians turn to substance abuse or any type of addiction, and ultimately not being able to or feeling safe to express our emotions leads to the physician who kills himself. And when I say emotional intelligence, I don't want you to feel insulted, because it's not a dig against your overall intelligence, but by definition, emotional intelligence is the ability to identify your emotions. So that means identifying the physical body, your emotions, when you're feeling something, to be able to appropriately label the emotion, and then to be able to communicate the emotion in a resourceful manner. It's also the ability to recognize others' emotions and be able to dance with those emotions and manage yourself inside of those emotions as well. And our community as physicians, we're not trained to do that. If your emotional intelligence is high, it is probably not because of being a doctor. It's because you did some extra training or you had very, very aware and mindful parents. And then the final thing is we refuse to ask for help. This is we believe we should be able to do it all by ourselves all the time. It's the myth of all ages, resulting from years of conditioning from our peers and our teachers, and it is the biggest pitfall in our development. So this is the result of our own stubbornness. Stuckness is the result of our own stubbornness, moving from stress to overwhelm, to burnout, being labeled as disruptive, failing relationships, mental health, um, and then increased risk for substance abuse and suicide. Ultimately, stubbornness is a life or death issue. But again, we're conditioned. It's not all our fault. It's either in our training or before our training growing up, we got conditioned to be this way. We got conditioned to never ask for help, to, leave our feelings at the door. All of those things we were conditioned. And our training reinforces all of the traits that we mentioned. And you can think about an example for each one of them. We went through them. So as I said, we're subject to the same things that our patients are subject to. And in addition to that, we are subject to the abuse of the doctor bashing that comes from not only the same people that we're pouring our hearts and ourselves into, but of our colleagues. So let's talk about getting unstuck here. And one of the biggest things I'm going to talk about in getting unstuck is getting your mind right. So the first is change your mind, change your life. We shift the context of powerlessness and become willing to be 100% responsible for our lives, cause in the matter. And it's not the same as blame. When I talk about being responsible, I'm talking about being the source of our life. When we think of responsibility as blame, it makes us wrong and it makes others wrong. But when we think about being responsible as being the source of our lives, it's actually empowering. So we have to first shift the context of powerlessness and be willing to be responsible for our own well-being. Getting our mind right means cultivating awareness. Look, here's the thing. We can't know all the answers. We all have blind spots. And it's okay that we don't have all the answers. Here's the thing. Just because we can't, quote unquote, fix ourselves doesn't mean we're crazy. We're not alone and we're not crazy. You are not alone and you are not crazy, because we all have blind spots. You think about in a car when you're driving, you have blind spots, even with the side mirror and the rear view mirror. And even if you have one of those little cute little mirrors you put on to see the blind spots, there's always going to be a blind spot there. And you cannot, by definition, see your own blind spot. The second thing is acceptance. We have to stop denying the problem. We have to stop denying that there is a problem. Our problems don't disappear by pretending that they're not there. So I want you to take a moment and think about a problem that you ignored and then realized it wasn't disappearing. Here's an example, and I'm going to share the example as a mom. When you gain that pregnancy weight, and you lose a bit of it, but you realize that the rest of it that's still there, when you ignore it, it's not going to just fall off by itself. You have to actually do something about it. The next thing is we have to understand our conditioning. We're taught to power through whatever, whenever, and that really has gotten us this far. But we've also been told what to do along the way as well. We've known our path, and as I said earlier, we're so cynical and resigned. So this is all a part of our conditioning. And when we begin to look into the unknown, which is undoing that conditioning, it can be scary. But it takes a belief without evidence that to be able to shift outside of those things. Um, no belief, no action, no results. So we have to deal with our conditioning, which means we have to deal with our underlying belief systems. All right. So dealing with our limiting belief is basically looking at what are those things what are those thought processes, those negative tapes playing in our head, those triggers for negative emotion that come up over and over and over again in our lives. What are those things? And we need to deal with those and get rid of those and eliminate those to be able to get new results. We need to look at whether we are running away from or whether we're running towards something. When we are suffering as a people, we want to often jump ship as quickly as possible. And we don't realize in running away that we may be jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. So it takes a mindful approach to actually sustain happiness. And furthermore, when we're looking at a running away from, we are focusing on the thing that we don't want. And when we focus on, because of the way our brain works, when we focus on the thing that we don't want, we often create more of that which we don't want. So when we are running towards, we create our vision and we actually have our eye on the prize. The other thing we want to do is shift the way we listen and process things. There's two ways of listening. There's the learning mode, which is curious, it's open, it's an expansive and creative and understanding way of listening. It's also a forgiving way of listening. All right. And then there's a protecting mode. In a protecting mode is defensiveness, there's judgment, there's fear, there's a numbness, there's anxious, there's shame, and there's ultimately shutdown. So where we often exist in our industry and as physicians through our conditioning is in the protective mode. And we need to be willing to shift ourselves from the protecting mode to the learning mode. And that means having the right tools. Having the right tools means knowing the right tools. And then knowing the right tools means knowing what you want. So here are questions to ask yourself. What do I want? What do I already have? What is missing? And what actions do I need to take to get from where I am to where I want to be? And you can make a list. That's the crux of beginning to create your vision. Look, if you don't know where you're going, then you're obviously going to end up someplace else. And I love the Stephen Covey quote, begin with the end in mind. So when we talk about acquiring the tools and using the right tools, there are tangible tools and there are intangible tools. The tangible tools are your apps, your classes, your social media, your webinars. Your intangible tools are knowledge, mindset, skill set, and as we talked about earlier, emotional intelligence, or as we call it, EQ. It's the intangible tools that are so hard to come by, and this is where having a coach or having a mastermind can come in. So coaching as a tool for mindset and skill set does all of these things. It aligns your personal values with your priorities, focuses on your strengths, increases your awareness, increases your sense of control, helps to create the vision. All of these things that help to undo that stuckness. Begin to align your values with your priorities, and then begin to create the action plan and the pathway that leads you to these values and the priorities, so that you experience a greater connection and fulfillment and alignment in your life. Getting unstuck means asking for help. And we suck at asking for help. And it's the same thing. We feel like we should be able to do it by ourselves all the time, and frankly, we don't want to answer to anyone else. We don't want that accountability. So no problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created it, says Albert Einstein. And I love this quote because, again, it just reinforces that we all have blind spots. Look, I have blind spots. I'm a coach. I've coached, hundreds of people, dozens of doctors, and I still have my blind spots. And guess what? I also have a coach. This is the value of external accountability. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So various forms of accountability. You got your personal support, friends, families, colleagues. You got your accountability systems like mobile apps, and you have your external accountability systems like hiring a coach or joining a mastermind group. The problem with your family and friends is that they may not get where you're coming from, and the problem with colleagues is that not all of the physicians are awake yet. So you may run into that whole scenario of cynicism and resignation and possibility killing, which can then disempower you and make you want to quit and stay stuck. These are accountability systems that are proven to work. Professional executive coaching, group classes and group masterminds. Now, here's the thing about that. We as physicians are way behind when it comes to coaching and masterminds and these classes. When it comes to any type of personal development, we are great at professional development as physicians. We are stellar at keeping ourselves professionally developed. But when it comes to personal development, we really lag behind. In the corporate world, corporate executives, CEOs, any type of corporate working person, they are very familiar with the idea of coaching and the value that it brings. But I know that in my own personal survey, one of the biggest barriers to physicians getting a coach is that they don't see the value in it. And so this is where there's an opportunity to have that listening or that learning mindset. So that is our webinar on getting unstuck. And just take a moment and figure for yourself what you've learned. What have you learned tonight? We've talked about what causes stuckness. We talked about what keeps stuckness in play, and we've given you a few tips to get started to get unstuck. And here's the thing: it's easy to take this knowledge and do nothing with it. It's easy to take this knowledge and forget about it. So I offer a free strategy call. Now, if you think that you want to know more, you can schedule a strategy call with me, and that'll help you to get clarity on where you are in the process of change. It'll help you to begin to create your ideal life, your ideal career, and then begin to put together an effective strategy for getting unstuck. So scheduling the strategy call is very, very easy. There's an application that you fill out, and the application is in the chat. Now, I've put that in the chat, but this is the link. And if you are listening to this recorded, you can actually just go to stressfreemomMD.com and fill out a form, and we can, once we receive your form, we'll send you the link to, or we'll contact you directly to schedule your call. Now, I want to end with a little poem that I love by Portia Nelson called Autobiography in 5 Chapters. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I've fallen again. I can't believe I'm in this same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit, but my eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. So, when will you choose to walk down a different street? All right. So if you're thinking that you want more information and you're ready to get unstuck, or you're even curious, go ahead and contact us for the free strategy call. Do that within the next 24 hours, and we have some specials waiting for you. And so thank you for joining this webinar today. We hope to hear from you and be able to schedule a strategy session with you, and look forward to empowering you to live a life that you absolutely love. So at this point, I want to ask if there are any questions. And I'm going to unmute. I'm going to have to take Alicia Keys. I didn't tell you it was a ball of energy. His voice was so